I want to share with you my very powerful story about how it's possible to heal from grief, shock, and trauma after the loss of a loved one. And my healing came through Dr. Robert D. McDonald, who's with me now. And I had a tremendous loss in my life a few months ago. My son, my beautiful son Christopher, who was about to turn 23 years old, unexpectedly crossed to the other side. And I was shocked and devastated and just unsure of how I would go on without carrying this sadness through the rest of my life. And I knew from studying naturopathy that those type of emotions can cause cancer and degenerative disease, according to the work of Dr. Hammer in German New Medicine. So Dr. Hammer lost his son in an accident and had been healthy all his life, and then all of a sudden came down with cancer and was suspicious about it and studied it and saw a direct correlation between those emotions, those negative emotions, that stress, and the onset of disease. And even the American Medical Association says that over 60% of all diseases caused by stress, by these emotions. What happened was, through a miraculous series of events, I met Dr. Robert McDonald. I had a session with him, and my grief, shock, and trauma were healed. Actually, my session with Dr. McDonald was 2 months to the day from when my son passed to the other side. I knew that he was at peace. I knew he wasn't suffering, so I felt good about that. But I didn't know how I would continue to live without grieving his physical presence until I met Dr. McDonald, and the work was amazing, and I really want to let the world know that you can heal from grief. You do not have to spend the rest of your life mourning the loss of a loved one, be it a spouse, a child, any person that is close to you in your life, that you can go on and live in joy. And Dr. Robert McDonald taught me that it's possible, and I'm living it. So I want to ask you, Robert, if you can share with everyone, because most people think that this is not possible, that our grief is just something we have to bear. Time will heal all wounds, people say. How is it possible that you, through your work, are able to really help people resolve these issues?
It's a very important question, and I know because you've had the personal experience of resolving shock and trauma and grief, that it's important to answer that question in some clarity. I can't go into the in-depth understanding of what goes on in the human mind that creates shock, trauma, and grief, and how to resolve it, because it takes considerable time to do that. But I can tell you now that shocking images, traumatic memories, and grief occur in a person's bodily feeling as a consequence of what they see in their mind's eye and hear in their mind's ear. So when we worked, what my work was to accomplish was to help you to resolve the shocking image that you had. You had a shocking image that we worked with immediately. The shocking image was quite terrible for you to look at, so we transformed that in a matter of minutes. We then worked with trauma. Trauma takes time. It's an event. A trauma is an event, whereas a shocking image is a single image. We did that in a very short order, and then we dealt with the grief. Now, grief, which is most people are interested in how that's resolved, most counselors, in fact, virtually every counselor that you'll meet who calls themselves a grief counselor will say to anyone who's lost a child, well, you lost a child, you'll grieve, and you'll never get over it. It's a very common statement by counselors and psychotherapists, particularly by grief counselors, that that person will never get over the grief. This is only said because they haven't understood the nature and structure of the mind that produces the grief. And the truth of the matter is that grief is resolved around the world the same way. Grief is caused around the world the same way. In every culture, in every language, every person who experiences grief experiences it because they think about the one that they love as lost and gone and in the past. When we transform that representation and the person sees the one they love as present, now, not gone but found, and in the present, and not lost but actually quite here, that present representation heals the heart of the one who's been experiencing grief. Now, that might sound odd to somebody listening the first time, but notice this. Everyone resolves grief that way. Everyone who's had a loss, and that's everybody in the world has had a loss, if they get over it, if they get over the loss, it's because they no longer think of the person as lost, gone, and in the past. They have them as present in their lives now, which happened with my relationship, for example, with my father, who committed suicide when I was 27, with my mother, who died in 2006, with many of the different people who died in my life. I've had many, many deaths, and I committed myself to understanding the nature and structure of grief and how to resolve it. So I did this with myself. My father is present in my life. My mother is present in my life. The way I think of them, it's almost like thinking about somebody who's gone into another room. They've gone into another room, so they're not lost. They're not gone. They just happen to be in the other room. And so we don't miss somebody who's present. So the end of grief comes when we no longer miss that person. And the only way to not miss someone is to notice that they're not gone, that they're present. So this is exactly what we did. And we did this within a couple of hours, actually. We sat down. First, I dealt with the shocking image. Then I dealt with the trauma. Then I dealt with the grief. And we also dealt verbally in the discussion with conflict, because you had a conflict about it. But all of that got solved in short order. And it's because of the nature of the mind and understanding the nature of the mind. The problem that happens in the world is ignorance of the nature and the structure and the operation and the purpose of the mind. When we understand the nature, the structure, the operation, and the purpose of the mind, we're then able to change our emotional life in the twinkling of an eye. It doesn't seem to most people that that's possible because they've been misinformed. But you are evidence that, in fact, it's doable and it's been done. And I've been doing this. For the past 40 years, I've taught people communication skills and mental health skills. For the past 30 years, I've been working with people in terms of shock and trauma and grief and internal conflict and codependence and most anything you can imagine, and resolving them as though it were happening within the twinkling of an eye. So my hope is that it'll go on this way and we'll help more and more people.
It was amazing and very profound, and I knew my life had changed right after the healing, and the sadness and the grief I knew were gone, and I've been able to live a life in joy. And when I think of my son, I do think of him in joy. There are moments where I miss his physical presence, but I must say that I was profoundly changed that day, and I want the world to know about it, because it's just not well known, and it's not even in the belief system of most people that this is possible. And Robert, you speak about the mind and the workings of the mind, which is the basis of your work. You also you talk about the heart and the sword, compassion. Why is that such an important element in your work?
Compassion is absolutely essential, indispensable for all personal transformation, in that if I'm working with somebody and they sense that I don't have compassion, if I don't have compassion, if I don't have understanding, then they will not trust me. Trust is essential for the personal transformation. When a person trusts, they're wide open and they can make the change by paying attention to how their mind works, and then we resolve it.
We thank you so much for joining us, and we will bring you more with Dr. Robert McDonald in the near future.